All set, guys? Okay. Let's get the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for March 1st, 2017 started. We are recording, so if anyone is recording, please let us know. And if you could silence your cell phones, that would be appreciated. We're going to start with the public meeting, public comment for any items that are not being heard tonight.
Real quick, just as a reminder for you guys, not our commission in particular, but a number of the boards have had trouble speaking into the microphones to be heard. So we just have to make sure that these are in closer proximity and speak clearly so that the recording can be heard, because there are recordings for other ones where it sounds like people are whispering at best and it's hard to hear. We haven't received that complaint about this one in particular, but I was asked to remind everyone when we started.
Well, I do mumble, so I'll do my best. Okay. Seeing there's no public comment, we'll go into the public hearing. We have a bunch of continuances, all of which are continued till March 15th. Zarella, 125 Walwinet Road. Zarella, 129 Walwinet Road, continued. Sunset House LLC, 15 Hallowell Lane, continued. Adam P. Peklowski Living Trust, 57 Pulpus Road is continued. Nantucket Community Sailing, 2 Bathing Beach Road is continued. And Monomoy LLC, 20 Monomoy Road is continued. And in the amended orders of conditions, we have 3 Beacon Lane Nominee Trust, 3 Beacon Lane continued as well. Like I said before, they're all continued till March 15th. So we will start with Fisher, 5 North Beach Street.
Hi, Mike Conley standing in for David Haynes. The plan is to put an addition on an existing dwelling in the resource area.
Just to go real quickly, the only resource area present here is the flood zone. So,
yeah.
And it's a crawl space foundation?
Yes. Yeah, the groundwater was observed at 28 inches with models at 15 inches. Their intent is to dig down to the groundwater, try to avoid dewatering, and then fill it with stone, and then put the foundation on top of that. Chuck Lenhart, Sandcastle Construction, is building, and he said shallow footings with frost prevention added to it, which
Engineered.
Right.
Engineered.
I did double check. David actually called about this today to let me know that Mike would be here, and instead that the crawl space also is designed for the flood zone, so it has they're using the smart louvers or whatever trade name they're going by now, but it's essentially the replacement for what used to be breakaway panels. It's the
Smart vent.
smart vent.
Yep.
The existing dwelling history, I believe, was built. It was in the 30s, and it was a garage. That's one of the things that they want, and they didn't want it. They don't want to touch it. They're just going to put the addition on the backside.
No grade change.
No grade change. All the extra material will be removed from the site. It's pretty flat, 1 foot plus or minus. We're adding a parking off of North Beach Street. There is a curb cut. It actually, the granite curving just dips down and then comes back up the other side from years ago, apparently.
Any questions? Questions from the public? Okay. Seeing up, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Motion to close?
Okay, we have a
Second.
motion to close. We have a second. All those in favor? We have to do this
You gotta do
individually.
it by roll.
We have to do this big roll call. Commissioner Golding is on the phone, so we will start with Ernie.
Yes.
Aye. David?
Yes.
Aye. Andy? Yes. Ashley?
Yes.
Yes. Ian? Yes. Very good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got used to that. Okay, so Holland Jr., 66 Westchester.
Good afternoon, Mark Ritz from Site Design Engineering, here with Dan Malloy and Sarah Alger representing the applicant. What you have before you this afternoon is an application to do a couple of things. First of all, to construct a pool and pool cabana located partially inside the 100-foot buffer, outside the 50-foot buffer, to do some additional invasive species removal, knotweed on the southern portion of the property, all the way up to the wetland boundary, and also to repair and improve an existing DPW drain line that runs across the property. Let's start with the pool and the cabana. The pool will be located partially outside the 100, partially inside the 100. The bottom of the pool will be approximately 2 feet below high groundwater. We did a test pit, maybe 15, 20 feet away from the pool, right here. The soil is on the plan. We are requesting a waiver for that work from the 2-foot groundwater separation. We have a portion of the property that's located outside the 100-foot buffer where we are proposing to put in a pool discharge infiltration area right here outside the 100-foot buffer. We will use this area for any temporary dewatering should it be required during construction, and also for any pool water that needs to be drained. It will be drained outside of the 100-foot buffer, outside of jurisdictional areas on the property. So we don't have the issues that have come up on some other projects in the area. The pool cabana will be on a slab foundation, so we do not anticipate having the same groundwater issues that we have with the pool. The brush cutting that we're proposing, the wetland was delineated under an RDA earlier last year, and we were authorized to do some brush cutting as part of that. We would like to extend the brush cutting and remove the knotweed up to the wetland boundary. We're proposing to replant the area with a native grass mix and also with some shrubby vegetation, which we called out in the NOI, things like bayberry, blueberry, typical buffer zone vegetation. We got some input from technical consultant for the commission suggesting we had initially proposed to do physical removal of the knotweed. We've been advised that it might be preferable to do cutting and aerial treatment of the knotweed so as not to potentially spread it to other sites. We're happy to follow that suggestion if that's what the commission would like us to do. The final portion of the project is the repair of an existing drain line which currently runs partially across our property and onto an abutting property and then discharges directly into the wetland. This is an old drain line, 40, 50, 60, God knows how many years old. It is not in very good shape. We're proposing to reconstruct the line, reroute it slightly so that it has better flow. We are proposing to run it down the western edge of our property, have it terminate just before the wetland buffer, just before the wetland boundary, excuse me, and have a small riprap apron there to disperse the flow a little bit and I'll let Dan speak to some of the reasons why we've chosen that location and configuration.
I think a lot of you, most of you already done a site walk and have seen kind of what's out there now. I think where the DPW excavated and found the outfall in the wetland where it is today. That's on the abutting property. So what you're seeing is a realignment of essentially what the drain line used to be. The line used to run straight, because the old used to do this. Years ago, the previous owner of the property got permits to build a house and snake the drain line around the house, which is what it does now. At the time, I guess that was a good idea. Doesn't function well. It's not pitched properly. All the bends and turns slow down the water. It doesn't drain. It gets clogged. So what we're doing, straightening the line out, like Mark said, straightening it out, essentially putting it back where it was, with the exception of we're taking it off of the abutter's property, so we're cutting that connection off. The location, and others question in terms of how close the wetland line is. We pulled it as far back as we actually could. The reason is due to the elevations. We're running the pipe very flat from the street all the way back here, and if we were to pull it back, it would be below grade. It would be underground. The pipe has to pitch, and the grade rises up from here. So we can't, there isn't enough elevation for us to pull it back. Ideally, it would go forward, which we can't do because of the wetlands. So if we could pull it back, absolutely, I think it'd be cheaper, it's easier to build a shorter line, but unfortunately, the elevations, there isn't enough room to actually do that.
And it would require significant soil disruption there, a lot of digging to actually pull it back. So we'd be removing a lot of material from the area if that were to happen. So we really have to have an end where it does.
You'd be creating a hole. You'd be dumping water down here, where the elevation is up here. So we can't.
You can't do like a swale, like a
The only way to do a
design at the
swale
end.
would be actually digging into the wetland itself and taking the wetland elevation back.
We'd have to excavate
have
into
to
the
actually-
wetland.
I guess this is like, this just looks like such junky fill in the buffer area that I don't know.
Even if we could take this fill out from here, that wouldn't do what you want to do is put this outlet somewhere up in here. I understand that, but in order to put that up here, to get the water to drain from here to there,
It's uphill.
it's up. It would be uphill.
So we'd have to dig into the wetland.
I can't raise this pipe up, else it won't flow. Pipe is at the minimum it can be at right now.
Could it be an infiltrator? Or would it not perk?
It would burn.
Through the,
Too close.
right.
What kind of volume do you expect out of that pipe? Is it a pretty substantial drain out of the street then, or?
It drains the entire intersection of Westchester and Pilgrim. Right now, it's
That's
either
right.
an 8 or 10 inch clay pipe in really different states of disarray.
They used to cut it up pretty good there.
Right, so the intersection floods right now because that pipe can't function. DPW did just clean it, so it functions better than it has been, but it still doesn't function well. It's a situation where there isn't a good, from an engineering standpoint, this is the only solution that fits. There isn't enough room elevation-wise to do really anything else unless you were to go into the wetlands with the pipe, which is the opposite of what we want to do.
Is there a filtering component to this design?
So, how deep is this, like, infiltrator at the end?
This is
No,
coming
it's
up,
just a-
this is just a pipe. The pipe ends.
So it's just going to be a pipe
Just some
dumping.
riprap.
Pipe dumps on the ground with
to,
stone. There's stone in front of it to stop the water.
Diffuse the water.
Yeah, I'd like to see a better design with plantings.
Oh, planting's not a problem. We can put planting. Riprap is there to withhold
The soil,
protect the
yeah.
soil.
To keep it from channelizing.
Yeah.
The whole area is going to be planted. That's
Right.
We're proposing to plant back up to just outside the 50-foot buffer with natives.
Right, but not just natives, like a better design for like a planted swale to help with the water. I don't know.
But what we're trying to do is make an existing failing situation better.
And if we put in a planted swale, we're going to have to excavate into the well. We'll have actual wetland disturbance to have that swale.
So the pipe's at 12.
The pipe coming out here is at 11.4.
Okay.
The grade just next door is 11.6.
Okay.
So we're at, our pipe is on the surface. If we do anything else, we're going to be underground.
If you put a swale down there, you're
Right,
probably
but
gonna be
so you
getting
just
water
have to
that
trench
way.
in through here?
Probably did a combination of like a
There's no
gravel,
room for a swale.
I mean, so
It'd be
perk through the
huge and
gravel,
shallow.
obviously you get to the wetland,
I
and
don't.
you incorporate plants.
The problem is that we're trying to go in front of it like we're trying to do. It's not, you can't, in engineering, you can't function because you're pulling it back. You're going to have a negative grade. And anything you plant in front of it, if you would try to do a gravel trench or something in front of it, it's going to be full of groundwater. And it's going to fill with mostly weeds, that's what's going to grow in it. And then we want to get back to a situation where it's going to get clogged because it can't flow. Normally, if there was something we could do to pull it back, less pipe for us is better. It's
Yeah.
cheaper. We're not against it. It just isn't elevation to do anything else that fit. That's the problem. And even though it doesn't, look great, it's an improvement over what's there now. Or at least we're alleviating the flooding that's happening in the street. It's still going to the wetland.
Right, you're making more of an impact to the resource area with the street water. The flooding in the street right now is removed from,
All that
The
water still
wetland.
goes
It's
to
in
the
that
wetland.
pipe, still in the old pipe.
So
but it,
Right.
it also goes, there is flooding on abutting properties that comes down, surface flooding basically runs down into that wetland.
Right. So right now, though, the swale is 6 feet, 4 feet by 6 feet. Is that what I'm getting?
It's a
Oh, riprap pad,
4 by 6.
4 by 6. So if you extended the riprap gravel bed, you could do that possibly, bring it back and just have it all gravel. So it'd still have the gravel to get through. Am I just not?
Well, the problem is you can't, if you bring the
Starts to go
riprap
uphill.
pad, this is going uphill.
Yeah.
Even if we cut the grade down,
Yeah.
the pipe still needs to end back here. So the gravel behind it wouldn't really.
I know. I'm seeing it.
I know what you're trying to,
I know.
what you're trying to accomplish. We're fighting.
Right.
Area.
Just trying to
fighting
increase the
two different-
filtering area.
Coming in at two
Yeah.
different places, we can't,
Yeah.
we're fighting a grade situation, it's coming from both directions. The wetland is up here, the pipe has to be here, and the grade is coming up.
Yeah.
So there just isn't room, even if we pulled it back 10 feet, we're going to make about this much difference in elevation of pipe.
Right.
There isn't enough, it's not like
It's a
pulling it
real
back
shallow
10 feet,
pitch.
it's a foot where we could do a swim.
Yeah.
There just isn't that much relief out there to do it. So even out here, you're going from
yeah, I guess,
13 to 11 over a couple hundred feet. There just isn't enough room to slope it any flatter to give you
Right.
room to pull it back.
Well, let's see if there's let's go back to any other questions?
Not on the pipe, but on the invasive species. Were you guys you were digging it out before, trying to remove?
Well, I think our initial proposal was to do physical removal, sifting, and haul off-site. But Bruce's report recommended that we do, cut it and spray it on site to try to kill everything off on site, and then replant. And we're happy to do either methodology, whichever the commission would prefer us to do. We can go, either way, whichever you think would work better.
Yeah, if you pulled that stuff out, you'd have to just grind it really fine to make sure you grind up all the buds even. And we tried a similar method. What's that site called? The Commons area? And we couldn't get all of the stuff out of the ground. I mean, it just goes so deep and it'll resprout. And you can't put that stuff, that soil, through the digester because they do not want any kind of soil. We have to shake off the roots of anything we pull out nowadays because they don't want any soil going through there. And apparently it'll damage the way the digester works, and then they won't let us use it anymore. So
we'll be happy to cut it, and, have a qualified applicator cut it, spray it in place, and do it that way. That's fine with us.
What is your time frame for the invasive species management? Just because normally you'd go a few seasons before you would start planting shrubs, et cetera, to make sure that you'd cut the population down, or the percentage.
What Bruce advised us to do is to cut it, as soon as the project gets started, cut it and spray it, and then plant a grass seed mix there to that wouldn't, depending on which herbicide was used on the knotweed, it wouldn't necessarily impact the native grass mix, which would give some growth there and keep cutting and treating any knotweed that resprouts until it's gone, and then coming with shrubby vegetation.
Okay.
So it could be monitored for a year, 2 years, whatever was appropriate until it's knocked back, and we'd assume that we'd have to have both the grasses and the shrubs planted and the knotweed removed prior to a COC.
That's something that Bruce and I actually talked about that the other day, that we've been encouraging people to put something on the ground, especially in areas like this, just to make sure that there's a minimal risk of sedimentation and sediment getting into the wetland, that there's something to at least hold some of the soil so we're not seeing surface water runoff or excess sediment getting into the wetland. So that's kind of the approach that we've been recommending for people that want to treat in this manner.
And that precludes the use of glyphosate. Then you have to use Garlon or something.
That's what Bruce recommended.
Triclopyr.
And
Unless you dripped it, and the initial, of course now, I mean, it's hard to say what's going to be popping up in there now.
yeah, you have to watch out too when you excavate for the pool and the cabana, that whoever does that doesn't just dump the knotweed mix.
The contracts we've talked to so far on this are very much aware of the knotweed situation, to the point where whatever they put in their truck, most places won't even let them on their property. So
Right.
they're very aware as to
Yeah.
what they have to do with it. I guess it's not a new situation now.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of nobody's just dumping that stuff because they know what happens when they do.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're sort of back here. I just wanted to
Yeah.
see if there was any other concerns in that.
I mean, I'd still like to see, I'd like to see a design with plants.
Well, it sounds to me we could do maybe a possible combination, but I see your point that the water level's at 11 and a quarter,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got like 12 right here, up about, whatever, 20 some odd feet away. So basically you're saying that unless the pipe were to come and just sit on the surface, it can't even sit on the surface.
Well, that's the thing. It would have to cut the grade back
Yeah,
all the way up to some distance.
and then you have this,
Even still, the pipe at that point are flowing flat.
right,
I can't give you a pitch.
right. The pipe is the only thing keeping it, right.
The pipe's only keeping the water moving. If
Right.
you do anything you find
stop
out
it
of the
there.
soil at all, it's going to either be level or flowing the wrong way.
Right.
But then if you have plants to help infiltrate,
We can put plants. That's
right,
what I'm
but
saying.
but actually do a design to handle the potential water flow coming through that pipe.
There isn't space to do what you're asking. There isn't.
And there isn't separation of groundwater to do
I guess I've just,
infiltration, really.
I
Right.
haven't looked at these specific design criteria because I'm not paid to do it, but in my master's program I looked at sites like this where you could do a better design with plants, where maybe you would back the pipe up a little bit, but think outside the box
In that
somewhat.
case, you're talking about a 25 to 50 foot stretch of vegetation and water can flow through. And that does work. But here, we don't have the elevation to actually make that happen.
You'd have to dig a trench basically and try to plant it
Well,
in
it's
the
not
trench.
just we have to dig the trench, we'd have to dig the whole area down to get it to flow, regardless of the plants. And to
And
do
the
that,
wetland flows into
the
your
wetland is
trench.
then going to be
It's
higher
going to fill the trench,
than the pipe.
and then we're not going to have, again, we don't have
Defeats the
flow,
purpose of
we'll
flow.
have stagnation there.
Potentially defeating the purpose of fixing. Right now, the drain line right now is in the wetland, below the water surface.
Right.
Right,
We
but I
saw
mean,
it.
like this wetland line has knotweed in the front too. I know that there's a better design with plants here, so that's all I'm saying.
If there were more room, I would agree with you that there's a better design. In this case, we design these a lot. We do drainage and infiltration systems and planting beds like you're talking about. There just isn't physical space in this situation to do that. With the pre-existing conditions that are here, we're fixed. We can't change elevations upstream. I can't raise those. If I could raise those, then I could raise the pipe and give you more room to do that. But we're stuck with the stream. We can't change what's happening upstream. And if we have to lower the pipe or put some obstruction in front of it, then we're really just putting back the condition that already exists.
Right, the other pipe is below the
Yeah,
water.
at that point, it's not worth doing the repair because the pipe's below the water, there isn't going to be flow anyway, we might as well leave the condition as is, no improvement.
We're doing this as a kind of an assist to the town in a way, where if the drain line goes through private property without an easement, doesn't function, we don't have to do it, it doesn't impact our project, but the DPW needs to be able to access and maintain this thing.
And you got
It's
both.
better for us
I mean,
if we
yeah.
straighten it out for them to access and maintain it than what happens today. So it's a net improvement. It doesn't provide an enhanced level of treatment like you'd want to see in something new, but it's still a net improvement overall. We just don't have the space to do much else.
So does the DPW have a management plan that's coming with this? As
It's
far
the
as
same management plan they have for all the other drain lines. They're required to go out there and clean them. In this case, by us bringing this project forward, they actually they didn't know they had this drain line. Nobody on the town knew this thing existed. The people that put it in are long since gone.
Right.
So now they know it's there. Now it will be maintained. There was no record of it even being found until we brought it up and said, hey, there's a drain line here. Where does it go?
There was only, 6 to 10 inches of daylight between the grade and the catch basin and the street and everything that had filled it in underneath. So this thing had not been looked at in a long time. And, it's not ideal, but it's an improvement over what's there. And it's not much more to do here.
and it's a 12-inch diameter pipe from an 8-inch diameter pipe?
Yes.
Other questions? Let's put this one out to the public, maybe something to do. Questions from the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Wilden for the Nantucket Land Council. I guess I would just echo what Commissioner Steinauer said, recommending to not attempt to remove the below-ground knotweed material from the site, because that becomes a bit of a contaminated mess. And then I just wanted to clarify the revegetation on the plan. Maybe mine's just too small, but I heard Mark say that it was going to be revegetated to around the 50-foot line, and I just wanted to make sure that was noted somewhere, because I just didn't want in the future because my impression was that it would be replanted by the existing brush line, just because that's
No.
where it's noted.
No, it would be, this is our edge of lawn here,
Okay.
so it would be revegetated to actually well beyond the 50 foot, and that's what I described in the narrative
Okay.
in the NOI. So we would be, revegetating a rather large area, pretty much,
Basically up to the lawn area.
Yeah, basically up to the
Okay.
lawn area, and again, Pennsylvania sedge, bayberry, blueberry, native,
Mhm.
buffer zone grass mix.
And then how would that sort of access for maintenance to the pipe down by the wetland be maintained in this area? I mean, I don't know if you envision this becoming more of a shrubby area or if it will be kept low, but
I think the portion along the line we would keep more as a grassy strip and have more, more shrubby area here, just to allow for that inevitable maintenance and access. So we wouldn't let this get too shrubby down that side.
okay. Great, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that was reflected.
Oh, what is the access for maintenance? Are they going to be able to go through another property or go through this one?
They have to go to this property. The problem now with access, the drain line exists, but there's no easement for it.
Yep.
It's just there.
Yep.
So we would give them an easement. We would grant the town an easement over it, so they could come through either our driveway or come straight through there.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, the only access they would need is likely just people.
Yeah.
They can back the line out and suck it out.
To this manhole?
Upstream, or actually clean it. Right, they can get down in the back. From a maintenance standpoint on something like this, once on a new line like this, it's really at the end of the pipe, maybe some brush cutting if anything grows up in the stonework. But there isn't a lot other than that, cleaning the manholes out. There's not a lot of maintenance. It's not a heavy maintenance system.
Yeah. What's the pipe? What's the diameter of the pipe now? The old one?
8-inch.
Is it? Yeah, saw the piece. Okay. Other questions?
I just have,
Could you give your name, please, for the?
Morgan Montgomery. I have just a letter that someone down on Westchester Street gave me to give to. It's like a neighbor situation, and so I'm giving you that. I just have a quick question. I didn't realize you were going to be so expedient because it was a little bit lower on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So I just would like to get some clarification. The pool and the fence went through December 20th, is that correct, with HDC? And then those plans were after that. But what I've been told is that, I'd like to know because I don't, is the pool within the 100-foot setback?
You can come look at the plan.
Oh, this is the pool, and this is...
This is outside the setback. This portion of the pool is inside the 100-foot setback.
Okay, so just this edge of the pool is in the... Where's the
wetland
wetland's
is here, so
Okay, so it's well inside, so is the house, right?
yes, the entire existing house is inside.
Okay. I only have one comment, and it's really just a general comment. It's not necessarily just about this project. I'm just curious about the whole pool situation, like in areas that are deemed wetland. I'm just curious why we're putting pools and like buildings and things like that when it's so close to it. Is that
Well, we have the no buffer zone. We have the 25. Well, and then we have the 50-foot. We usually, we don't cover anything outside the 100. Okay, if it's outside the 100, it's beyond our jurisdiction. But we will generally approve structures outside the 50. You don't want to go inside the 50. But
okay? So it doesn't matter if it's building or pool or anything.
Right, although there's other situations that people look at, but
So,
general.
So what happens? What do they do with the water in the pool? Like if it has to be drained?
They just brought it up as there is a area outside the 100 buffer zone is a proposed area for draining the pool.
And where does it go? I mean, just into the ground? Because I'm unaware, so I just wanted to find out because someone had asked me, and I said I'd come. So.
Well, some of the pools we do require people to take them out and truck out the water if they don't have that option.
I guess that's all I really need to know.
No problem.
I have a public
Mr.
opportunity.
Chairman?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, that actually, I've been concerned while listening to this, what guarantees we have that the drain infiltration area won't impact the wetland. That's obviously set just outside so that it's nominally beyond our control. But certainly, seepage would be within our purview if it comes within the 100-foot buffer. And I'm curious why it isn't just being pumped out into the town system.
I think this is the town system.
No, it would end up in the
Basically,
wetland.
Town system in the vicinity is the drain line we're proposing to put back, which would run directly into the wetland.
All right, well, I'm obviously not fully gathering. I guess this is part of the problem when one is a couple of thousand miles away. Tell me why. Tell me, would you give us more of a feeling for the design of the drain infiltration area? What sort of capacity it has and how it's been engineered?
Dan Malloy, the system will be sized to accommodate. Typically, when you pump a pool out, when you winterize a pool, it's the only time you do pump them out. I have a pool myself. You pump about a foot to 18 inches of water out of the pool. That's it. You can size to be infiltration chambers, similar to anywhere else. They'll be outside the buffer zone. It gets pumped into the chambers. Done. There'll be some infiltration, storage, and eventually it'll all infiltrate. It's just like any other drainage system you'd see. In this case, we have a specific defined volume. We can provide that volume, and that's all it has to happen.
Well, we do have.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, we have used the requirements more recently of no chemicals allowed in the pool after a certain date. So if there was a draining, we can always consider that. If the draining would only happen after a certain time period, after the last.
Pools are only drained when they get winterized, and that's there's never a reason to take water out otherwise.
Right.
So it's
Well,
October.
what we've been typically doing before, and I think you could keep it more generic, is on the last pool we've had, we were essentially requiring that all chemical treatments be discontinued 3 weeks prior to winterization or being pumped, because that gives enough time for whatever chemicals in the pool to essentially evaporate off, and for the water to revert to regular water or as close to as possible. And that's something that we've been conditioning pretty standardly lately, with the exception being if you're trucking it off-site, you can do what you need to do.
We'd be happy to use chemicals 3 weeks prior. That combined with the infiltration outside of the buffer, I think, is consistent with.
Right. I mean, I think that makes definite sense here, especially since we know that the groundwater, as you pointed out, the pool was going to be 2 feet below groundwater, and the infiltration areas maybe 1 foot above that.
We've got groundwater at approximately 12-foot elevation on the site. Our infiltration system is going at just around 16 to 17 foot contour.
Right.
So we have a decent separation there, but again, we'd be happy to cease treatment 3 weeks prior. That's fine.
Probably have to keep some water in the pool anyway, don't you? Or it'll pop out of the ground, or you're going to anchor it down.
You only pump out a foot to foot and a half off the top. That's all.
That's all that gets taken out.
I was reading this letter. I'm kind of switching back again to the drainage swale. Would a cross-section of this design help us out?
I mean, I would like to see something more. I mean,
If we made a cross section, it's going to show you what we just told you. This
Well, it's exact. Well, I'm just wondering if there's a.
there isn't more information I can give you
So-
to show.
what's the increased water flow then going to the wetland with an increase in the pipe size? I think that there's going to be an impact here that isn't being recognized.
And that's why we have the riprap. The reason for the stone at the end is to slow down the discharge from the water. That's why
Right,
it's
but
there.
I'm not just talking slowing down the water, but there's going to be a significant amount of road chemicals that are getting in here too. So to know what sort of plants you might put so that those chemicals aren't going directly to the wetland, if we're making an improvement, I'd like to see
We
that.
can put plants in that riprap zone. That can be planted. what I'm saying is we don't have space to do anything more than that.
So I'd love to see a design of what you're talking about when you say put plants in it.
We would put the same plants putting in the wetland buffer, in the buffer plantings. You don't have, what you're looking to do and what we have space to do are two entirely different things. We can't put a bioretention area or a rain garden or something like what you would normally see in this situation, because the elevations don't allow it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Without, it just physically is not space. And like I said, we're not trying to force this in. It's costing us more to do it this way. If we could pull it back 50 feet, 100 feet, that's better for us. There just isn't enough room. We can't excavate, we can't lower it down and have the pipe back in a non-functioning situation like it is now. If we do that, then we might as well not fix it.
Okay, so I'd love to see what the DPW's maintenance plan is. We're increasing the size of the pipe going to the wetland. So I want to see what the plan is forward for that, because that will have a bigger impact to this area.
I can't speak for the DPW. I don't know their exact maintenance schedule. I don't know. I have no idea what it is.
Is more water going to go in there, or is it just going to maybe not take quite as long
Same amount of
for
water,
it to get
basically.
there?
Just gonna
There's
tap
no
it quicker.
additional water.
Right.
It's all the same water. No
From the same
Same
basin,
drainage
same
basin.
area.
same
the
water.
street.
Just gets in
We're
quicker.
getting it there a little quicker,
Yeah.
so we can stop flooding the street, which then floods the neighbors' properties.
Flows down their driveway.
We're not changing quantities. The rate will go up a little because the pipe is bigger. That's, I can't debate that. But everything else, from a functional standpoint, is improved. Flow volume is exactly the same. Whatever's getting there now is still going to get there. Even though
There's going to be a time lag, though.
There's a small discharge difference, but there is at least some level of effort to clean something before it gets in there. It's not a large area. Again, we're looking at we're doing the best we can with the space that we have.
What we're really dealing with here is the town's ancient method of
Right.
dealing with road runoff, which was to pipe it to the nearest wetland they possibly could and just dump it in there. And now we're left with this bizarre network of pipes that are flowing
Going for
into
the road. Yeah.
Yeah.
Westchester
and-
Street's loaded with these. We dealt with the same thing at 20 and 22, 24.
We've had these problems, and in an ideal world, we'd be able to pick up the whole street and fix the whole thing like you would have it in a modern design now. That just isn't, you just can't do that here. There isn't scope and area enough to do what you would like to see. I would like to see more treatment, but we normally would have, we just physically don't have the room to do it. It just isn't there. It's no different than a pipe downtown that goes right out to the harbor. They clean up when they can, but the situations where you just physically, the roads and everything else, the infrastructure's already in place, and we can't change, and we're stuck with it.
Could the DPW do something at the drain on the road, and like put something in there, and then have like the pipe sitting up a little higher so it'll, at least get the
Alright.
solids out?
The only thing you can do up in the street, if it would fit, is to put what they call a hood. You see them in cash basins sometimes, like a dryer vent type of thing. It goes against the outlet pipe, it stops some of the debris, keeps it up in that system so it can't flow through. We could put one of those upstream, grow, if not in the manhole in the street, the very first manhole on our property. It's called for simple terms, it's called a hood. There's lots of different names. It's just something that gets attached inside the structure. At least that would stop some of the debris. It's not going to provide an enormous level of treatment. It's something. But again, you're not going to be able to get what you're looking for space-wise.
Are we redoing the manhole in the street as well, or we're just tapping into
Tapping into it.
Tapping into it.
And then
So there's no
putting
way to lower the manhole
new one.
or raise the manhole.
We can't raise it because there's
Existing street.
It's at the
existing
street.
street.
So,
Yeah.
elevation.
And if you lower it, it's not gonna flow.
Right, and there's no dead space below the outlet of the manhole, like to catch solids. I'm saying, is the pit lower than the pipe
We
headed
could
to the wetland?
make one of ours, what I would say is we're doing this one.
You say doing that to the first stop.
We could make our first structure, normally when that we're talking about there is what you see is a catch basin of a 4-foot sump.
Mhm.
It would have that structure, the hood on it. So water coming in hits the hood, debris large debris
Sand.
settles out and can't
Settles
get
on
out,
some
it stays
trash.
there.
Yeah.
That's, in that case, we just mandate that one of the manholes, doesn't really matter which one, I prefer the first one,
Just to get to.
just because it's easier to get to, provided with a 4-foot sump with a hood. That's standard, easy to do, it's not, it's an improvement, there's nothing now, so it's an improvement. It's little things like that is all you're really going to be able to squeeze in.
Yeah, I guess I'm not convinced that anything was really flowing through that first pipe, so,
Probably wasn't.
right, so I don't know.
You know it's supposed to. Well, any thoughts from the existing board?
I can't think of any way to make it better.
Would you be interested in seeing anything else, other information?
I can't think, they're trying to tell us don't have any other information to come with.
Yeah. Ian?
I don't have any better ideas.
Well, I feel at a disadvantage because I can barely hear Ernie, and so I think I'm going to go with my fellow commissioners. They feel that it's been suitably presented and they don't want any more information.
Okay.
I do have another public comment.
Please do.
That, just to put it on the record, because they sent it and I got a phone call later. We did receive a letter from Dan Bailey today at like 2 p.m. He apologized for the lateness, but he was on vacation last week and was only hired yesterday to look at this. But he sent us a letter on behalf of Jonathan Blackman, who owns the property at 68 West Chester Street. Apologies again for not getting it to you physically, but we literally got it at after 2 p.m. today. So I can read it word for word, or I can summarize, whichever you guys prefer.
Summarize.
All right, so summarize. So just real quickly, he just says Mr. Blackman's property directly abuts the Holland property at 66 West Chester Street. So if you're looking at the plan, it would be the property on the left-hand side of the plan.
The
The
one
house.
drain line goes on right
Yep.
Gotcha.
In the back. His primary concerns are exacerbation of the existing drainage and flooding problems, the amount of work and improvements on the proposed buffer zone, the discharge of pool waters and chemicals to the groundwater, and the effect of replacing the municipal drain line. And he goes into kind of detail each one of those. And then he says, most fundamentally, the commission cannot approve the applicant's waiver request because the applicant has not submitted a detailed alternatives analysis. And let me see if I can pull some highlights that aren't. Just to touch on this quickly, the drainage and flooding problem, he's concerned that the pool and other improvements in the buffer zone will exacerbate the flooding problems. The scope of work within the buffer zone, it's the same concern that it's just going to exacerbate surface water issues. Discharge of pool water is, he's concerned about pool chemicals that will be infiltrated into the groundwater, and then the replacement of the municipal drainage line. They say they do not necessarily object to the work. They would like to hire their own engineer to evaluate it. And they want to be sure that it will help address the existing flooding problems. And then he kind of recaps, but that's essentially the 4 issues that he brought up. So we'll send it around to everyone to read, but I didn't figure at 2:30 today that anyone would be checking the email or get it to read that. But I wanted to make sure it made it onto the record that they did submit it and they put those things in. I know we've discussed those 4 things to length. So.
Well, there is a concern about this, even though we don't seem to have an alternative. I'm curious if it's worth.
We have a letter in there from DPW
Yeah.
as well.
Is that their engineer? Well, I know it was from Carr.
The former DPW director had
Yeah.
reviewed this plan and had sent in a letter email in support of it. So I know the town has reviewed it,
Yeah.
blessed it,
Mhm.
for lack of a better word.
The neighbor didn't mention any timeline as to when his engineer would.
Well, he engaged his legal counsel yesterday by the letter, so I would be suspect that they, at this point, probably haven't engaged an engineer. I haven't heard that speculation on my behalf, but the typical order for these reviews are legal counsel and then
Right.
engineering or, other experts being brought in to review. So I would assume that at best they might have engaged someone today, but not for nothing. I hate to always bring up this point.
Yeah.
It was filed 2.5 weeks ago.
So this is.
So, I mean, I very rarely feel sorry for people that say they just got to it the day before the hearing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, regardless of him, I would still like to see the why you can't do a better design with the plants and the riprap, like what the alternate would be and how much extra space you would need.
It's not space. We have physical space. We don't have the elevation.
Yes.
We don't have the ability to cut the slope back and have the water flow into the well if we pull the pipe back. The system will not function. You have a pipe running downhill.
Mm-hmm.
If we pull the pipe back, the grade's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we cut the grade down, if I cut the grade down so I can't cut the grade down anymore. You have a situation where the wetland is here and the pipe is there as well.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, they meet and it works. If we pull the pipe back, this will be flat or below the elevation. I can't get water to flow. The water won't flow uphill. We'll end up creating a pool in front of the pipe.
Not if you have the plants. I'd just like to see something with plants.
can I ask a quick question about that? Because I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly too, from kind of both perspectives. Is I guess the way I'm hearing what you're explaining, Dan, is if you pulled it back to get the vertical change that you need, you would essentially be having to expand the wetland area back to get that elevation to blend it in there. So then the wetland would be, you'd essentially be having to create resource area to get it out. And then the concern is if the water comes up and it's at surface, there's going to be surface water at the end of the pipe that will prevent flow coming out.
Correct. So
All right.
the elevation of the pipe right now is 11.4.
Mm-hmm.
The grade right there is 11.4. If we pull the pipe back, we shorten the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
The elevation of that pipe is 50 back 50 feet.
Mm-hmm.
The elevation of that pipe would be about 11.6.
Okay.
Go up that much.
Okay.
Then the grade all around it, even on the abutter's property, is up to 12, if not higher. And we can cut the grade down on our property, but we can't, now at this point, we can't get water to flow from the pipe to the well. We're talking getting it to flow over 2 inches of pitch and 50 feet, or some of it won't work. There isn't enough slope
Right.
for the drain to actually function. The plants, so in this case, the plants, stone, whatever, are irrelevant. The pipe, the water physically can't flow uphill.
I don't know why it's flowing. I guess I'm confused why it would be flowing back
That's what I'm thinking.
uphill
That's
to
why I
get
think
to
we
the
need a
wetland.
cross-section.
Yeah, I would love to see a cross section of whatever's going on at the end here.
Oh, okay. I mean,
I was just going to jump up and basically go along those lines, and I totally understand what you're saying, Dan, in your explanation, but I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to request a cross-section diagram that just sort of shows those elevations. I think it just might communicate the situation better as far as where the street is and the pipe and the riprap, and then you could also show that where you're going to put the hood you're talking about, and maybe more exactly what will be planted in the riprap. Maybe that would just help to communicate the situation better.
I just have a feeling a cross section might help the
Just because there
argument.
seems to be.
We
Yeah.
could prepare it.
Yeah.
It's not going to, it may illustrate it for you, but it's not going to give you an option that's going to say, look, there it is.
Right.
I understand what you want to see, but I'm trying to tell you from a professional standpoint, it's not going to, doing the extra work is not going to give you something. It's going to say, oh, just do this. There isn't, regardless of what we draw, what we prepare, the elevations are the same. We can't change
So-
how water's going to flow from one point to the
And that's fine, but I don't feel comfortable passing this the way this is laid out for me right now. So that's where I stand with this. I need a little bit more explanation to the end detail. So.
I think what I'm hearing is the ground goes up faster than the pipe is going up. So if you move the pipe back, it's further underground. And
Right.
so they would have to dig a trench to get the water to come out of the pipe.
And then it would have any slope.
And then what's it going to do?
Well, you're increasing the,
Unless you dig a trench all the way to the wetland.
And then the wetland will come to it.
Then the
Yeah.
wetland will fill in and we'll have.
There's going to be
You're
so
still
much
gonna be dumping it
manipulation
into the wetland.
with the
You're just gonna
invasive
make the wetland
species
bigger.
management. So,
So I don't know. I think I'm happy. I mean, I don't like this, but I don't see any way to make it better. I mean, they can draw all the drawings they want. It's not going to make it any better. It's just going to.
Emily? I don't want to get bogged down on
Thank you,
this,
Mr.
but
Chairman. I was just going to say, I don't necessarily think it will make it better or create any more alternatives, but it might just help to document for everyone that there are not other alternatives and clarify that for the record and for the commissioners that are still unsure. That's all.
thank you.
I could draw a picture on that blackboard.
It's not off the sketch on paper, we could do the same thing.
Okay.
We would like to see this
Well-
through today if possible, if that's.
Okay,
if
well,
something
maybe we
can
just,
do.
if you understand the situation. David, do you have any thought on what you would,
I understand what he's saying.
so you don't think that a drawing?
I understand.
Well, I guess the question is really, drawings aside and plans aside, is if there's a concern for impacts, how would you guys go about conditioning it or reviewing it, or what impacts are of concern that need to be addressed? And I think that's the kind of the question at the end of the day is it's designed to do a certain thing. If there's an impact associated with how you either condition that to mitigate that impact, or if there's concern of an impact against performance standards to such a degree where you need to say, we need more information to address that impact. I think that's kind of the crux of the issue here is pictures and cross sections are nice, but I think we need to address what impact to the performance standards and interests we're trying to deal with. And if it's bringing water to the wetland and potentially causing surface water contamination, that would be something, but I think we need to ferret out
What it is?
what those impacts are.
The one thing I would think would be to have the DPW in here to put a different type of a structure on the street that had the ability to at least get the suspended stuff out, like have it deeper than the pipe so that water would flow in and then things could settle out below, and then once it got up to the level of the pipe, it could flow out. But now we're on the street, which is probably outside of these guys' purview.
Yes.
And that's also sort of what we tried to discuss in that first manhole, was to have the 4-foot sump there.
Have the sump, that would
That
be.
will
And
allow,
then sort of do that
Right.
right
that
there.
will allow some sedimentation to occur where we do have control over it. The hood to reduce the flow, and the sump to capture some of the coarser sediment. Because
Yeah.
we don't have control over what the DPW will do in the street.
I don't think the DPW has
anything.
plans to replace that catch basin
No. I think I'm
at
with
this
this.
point.
Well, I have a feeling we should just maybe, I don't think there's a real other than actually I'm getting further information. I'm not personally sure it's going to make much of a difference, but you guys are aware of what that actually does not necessarily feel comfortable with this design. So, if you,
If- Obviously, we'd like to get it done.
Mhm.
If there's something we can provide, if you think it's really gonna make a difference, we can provide it. Just try not to continue and extend this, and we don't have to fix the drain line. I'm not trying to threaten that, but we're trying to get the project done. The drain works with it. If the drain's gonna be a huge problem to hold everything up, we can provide provide, we can do a section, a profile of the plan, that'll show you just what we talked about. I'm very confident all it's going to do is give you a plan and say, here's the profile of the line. It'll show you what's going on, it'll make it clear, but it's not going to change. I'm not going to come back to you with a changed design based on that profile. We haven't, we do the profiles on our own, we didn't provide it, so we have looked at it. So I can tell you now, the profile is going to come, we're not going to come back in 2 weeks and say, hey, we did the profile, guess what? Here's a different design. There just isn't, the elevation is not there to allow something else to work. If there were, we would do it. And we do a lot of these designs. In this case, there's just nothing else fits. It's not the ideal scenario, but it's what we have to work with.
If we had another design that would have saved us 30
Right.
minutes of
Okay, like
discussion, we
right.
would have had it.
Okay.
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to my point a little bit is I think we need to do a better job if we have a concern about the design for an impact that's going to occur, a better explanation of what that impact is. Because
So I guess I'm concerned that we now have an 8-inch pipe that I'm pretty convinced rarely had any flow coming through at this point. We're increasing that to a 12-inch pipe going off of the road. So we're increasing surface water flow or the volume. We're also probably going to have more road solids, more chemicals without treatment terminating on a 4x6 stone riprap in the buffer zone.
Well, I don't think
Without like a new maintenance plan to say this is why it's better. I know the other one didn't seem to be working, but this to me isn't better without a little bit more idea on the plan. But that's me, and you know.
Well, I don't know if the 8-inch pipe drains or not. I mean, apparently it drains slow.
I can tell you from knowledge of before and after, now the DPW is aware of it, they cleaned it.
Yeah.
They found the pipe, so it did flow before, obviously very slow because it was clogged.
Yeah.
If you've been out in that intersection recently in a rainstorm, it's not flooding like it used to, but the drain's been cleaned.
Right. So the
So
drain
it is
basin.
functioning, it is
Right.
flowing.
Right.
And all that water in the street is getting there faster now than it did 6 months ago,
Right.
because the system was cleaned.
It's the same amount of street area being covered by that drain.
Right. The water volume that we're talking about is identical. Nothing's
Right.
being changed. It's only the delivery mechanism of
Right.
how it's getting from A to B.
Okay. Well,
I think if they put that sump in, then we're
I
looking
think the
at
sump
an
is a big plus
improvement.
personally.
I agree.
And
That's not a problem. Make
Right.
the first,
Yeah.
structure, first manhole on our property, would have a 4-foot sump with a hood.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
not a problem.
Well, I don't get the feeling that that the board is looking for other information here. As a whole. So, Jeff, do we have everything on this one?
we do have, if there's no more information that you guys are looking for,
Right.
or that they want to provide, we have all of the technical pieces required to complete a file.
The board as a whole, are we ready to close? John? Okay. Okay, someone might like to make a motion?
Move to close.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Ian?
I'm not at this point, although I'm abstaining, I guess. I just, somehow I feel very uncomfortable, because from what I've read and heard, I'm not sure of its impact on the wetlands. So I abstain.
Assuming 5 members, at least sounds like 2 out of 5, want more information.
Yeah.
I do believe that's
It might be better to wait and have the full board here anyway.
It would be better for the commission, we can continue the next meeting, provide you with this section you're asking for. It will show how the system functions, the elevations.
have a feeling that might be to everyone's advantage here.
Mm-hmm. I think so too.
So,
Yeah, I'm anticipating having the full complement of 7 at the next hearing too, so.
Will they read back in? Is that
Yes,
what happens?
I'll make sure that they read back in.
so I guess with that, I'd like to request a continuance, if the
2
commission
weeks.
is satisfied for the next hearing, provide a section showing the detail we talked about, as well as showing the 4-foot sump on the first manhole that we talked about.
Maybe some planting detail.
So a little more planning
Detail,
detail, yeah.
paragraph where we can fit it, so you can see what it looks like. And if there's anything else,
Do you want a
think of.
maintenance schedule from the DPW or something?
Certainly talk to DPW.
I'd be good to other, cars.
Yeah, to have them at least acknowledge, or the new director acknowledge that they are going to be maintaining this.
So 2 weeks. So we'll continue for 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a definite concern. Okay. Let's continue. Okay, so now we're going into the public meeting. We got one minor mod. Unless that's changed. Thanks, guys. Okay. Minor mods. Fargo Way Realty Trust. Orient Realty Trust 10 Fargo Way.
Yes, so I'll go over this one, Art asked me to. So this is the project that we just permitted for the installation of the Wilkinson array at 10 Fargo Way. What they're looking to do now is they've realized for construction of the project that to effectively install it, they need to remove a portion of the existing beach stairs, and then they just want to put the existing beach stairs back in the same place. It's just more of a construction issue. They were just going to do it to move it, but then they felt that they should probably modify the permit to reflect the fact that they're going to just remove it, set it to the side, get what they need to in and around it, and then move it back. So that's what they're requesting to do.
Nice to ask.
It's not a change in design. Sometimes with these, it's kind of a construction decision, but they just wanted to be sure that if the stairs disappeared for a minute and someone was looking, that people would understand that for safety and for ease of construction, they felt it was easiest to leave the footings and stuff in place and take the physical structure out of the way and then bring it back.
Any questions? So that's your recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. Someone like to make that recommendation and approve? The minor mod?
I move to approve the minor mod.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, Ernie?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Andy? Aye. Ashley?
I didn't approve the first project, so how does that work?
But you can still approve the minor modification.
Aye.
Ian?
Yes.
Passes unanimously. So certificates of compliance, what do we have?
Well, we can run through these pretty quickly. I think if we take the first 4 together, Mr. Chairman, it would probably be easiest.
Okay.
So, not to jump ahead, but the first 4 are the old funeral home reconstruction projects. So Fayette Street's the street that runs next to the town building that connects Washington Street to Union Street. And they've completed construction there. The only resource area in question was land subject to coastal storm flowage. They have not changed any of the grades, and their as-built reflect that fact. For all 4, there were no real conditions with those plans other than maintaining the grades. And I was going to recommend that we could issue all 4 certificates of compliance. They're all kind of connected into one project.
Well, yeah.
They just permitted them separately.
Okay, so this is 13 Fayette, 11 Fayette, 42B Union, and 42A Union. Lot B.
Oh, and just to add real quickly, I mentioned that the grades on the as-built reflected that they hadn't changed, but then also in the field when we did our inspection, comparing it to the abutting properties. Usually when we have areas of fill or something, you see little drop-offs or weird grading things. These all blended into the existing grades without any noticeable differences, so
Okay.
it's pretty spot on.
I'll move to issue the 4 certs.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Ernie?
Aye.
Sorry.
David? Aye. Andy? Aye.
Ashley, aye.
Ian?
Aye.
Very good. That passes. Those 4 passes unanimously. Winslick, 79 Squam Road.
All right, so this was a little different of a project. This was for kind of a full site redevelopment that spun into an order of conditions and 3 amended orders of conditions. So it's kind of a dynamic project. I'm going to get the estimate up for this one. But it essentially was for the removal of a house from within the wetland resource area. Removal of a septic system, kind of a redevelopment of the site with a house and pool and new septic systems. Just to kind of give intelligence to Ernie, you're going to be kind of excluded from this. But the site prior, the previous house used to sit in this location here, and this original septic system sat down into the 25-foot setback here. So they pulled the house back outside of 50. This lawn/slate, or just some squares with grass in between them that are just slate, and then a bulk of the project, the pool and the other second dwelling and the septic system are all outside of commission jurisdiction. So we're really just looking at kind of the main house and the pullback and the plantings. Everything is in compliance. The area has been revegetated and is growing. And I would recommend that it could be issued a certificate of compliance.
Someone can make that recommendation?
Motion issue.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Ernie?
Aye.
David?
Yes.
Andy? Yes.
Aye.
Oh, yeah. Ashley?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That passes unanimously.
Jumping.
I know he was
His turn.
having some margarita or something.
Yeah, he's got something waiting for him, wherever he is.
He's starting to get giddy. Oh, God. I can't even pronounce this one. What is that one? Chow, 77 Washington Street.
So this is the one that's on the corner of Washington and Eastern Street. Not Washington, Eastern, Washington and Francis Street. That everyone drives by pretty much every day when they come into town.
Yep.
It's another one that was a flood zone project. It does have the buffer zone from the coastal beach, but everything is built in compliance. Again, the grades and the as-built reflect that the grades haven't changed. In physical inspection, you don't see any of those funky little breaks that we see where people try to get tricky with grades. And I would also recommend that this one could be issued its certificate of compliance.
This is the one that got hit by the car.
Oh, yeah.
It's been on, but been open for a while. Like a reminder comes. Okay. Someone wants to make that. Did you put it on? Oh.
Move the issue.
Is there a
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Ian?
Aye.
Oh, that's right. Okay, Ernie?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Andy? Aye. Ashley?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. Okay. So, orders of conditions.
We only have the one,
Yeah.
and I will pass it out.
Good job.
All the other ones that I've gotten ready on there. So this is the project that Mike Conley presented. That was just the flood zone only project. The new driveway in addition. You can see it didn't really have a lot of
Simple stuff.
changes.
Okay. Pretty straightforward one. Would someone like to make a motion? 5 North Beach Street.
Say move to issue as drafted.
Do we have a second?
Second.
So all those in favor? Ernie?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Andy? Aye. Ashley?
Aye.
Ian?
I'm abstaining since I can't see it.
Okay, no problem. So then that passes with Commissioner Golding abstaining. And continued on Holland. So other business. Approval of minutes. Any comments, issues? Okay, I will pass that on, approve on by unanimous consent. Enforcement actions.
Whole list.
All right, we have a list, and just really quickly, I handed you guys out. Joanne was kind enough. One of her projects she's been working on, and she got kind of a quick draft of it ready today, is we're going to start listing these a little different on the agenda, and we're going to start attaching to the packet and two things. A sheet, essentially, of kind of open and outstanding enforcements with little tiny updates on there for us to talk about, and ones that are kind of the most active will get listed on the agenda in a new section for enforcement, because we seem to be picking up a lot of them, and we have more to add to the list this evening. But this will be available. We're also going to put this up on our website at some point when we get a format that we really like, so everyone can see where violations are and what's kind of going on, to kind of keep track of what's happening with some of them. Some of them close quickly, some of them go slowly. Some of them it's just to remind us that, like, we need to be out at the Holly Farm in the spring to see once dormancy breaks on plants, what they're looking like and going forward, because that enforcement is going to remain open until we're satisfied, and there are kind of other things. So everyone can read those, and I'll kind of go through the specifically listed ones there. But then I know there are questions a lot within this last category, properties under review. So when we get calls or complaints or things that come up, or violations that we get reported that we're looking into, they're going to fall into that category. Or if you guys have a specific concern, like there's the property on Pulpus Road that we look into from time to time, then we'll probably keep those on the list just to see what's kind of going on, or those are the properties we're looking at, so people know that we've been out there, kind of where we are with the status on those, or if we got reports that there's a violation or not, and we're looking into it, where we haven't actually issued it out. So just to start through the list on the agenda, Thompson, 14 Fargo Way. That was the one where you guys sent the letter to Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson has gotten back in touch with us about scheduling his appearance in front of us, and we received correspondence from his legal counsel and Mr. Thompson that they will be here at the next meeting. They were out of the country or on vacation for a week, so they'll be here on March 15th. We'll be scheduling their visit to talk about the issues of compliance on his structure. So he and his attorney, and I'm going to guess his other consultant for the project, will be in attendance to have that discussion. So they're on their way. The next one down isn't really an enforcement issue, but it is for Chapter 91, Winthrop Management, 2 New Whale Street. That's the Stop and Shop parking lot catch basins. They've engaged a firm to take over the management responsibility of those, and they will be on site here in the next week or so, I believe, to clean out, pump, install all of the oil absorbent pillows, and then be giving us quarterly reports on their inspections going forward. And they've been engaged to do that, so hopefully that problem will take care of itself and won't enter enforcement beyond there. Next one down, under properties under review and on the agenda, Nantucket Islands Land Bank, 168 Hummock Pond Road. That was the report that we received from Rachel Powers and Frank Daly. We were at the last meeting to talk about that property and some of the work that Sustainable is doing as part of the community farm. I said community garden the other day, and I got scolded for calling it. But the community farm on the land bank property that's there, and that's something that, now that I'm back from vacation, I'm going to make a site visit with the land bank and Sustainable next week. They're all just away for a school break, to go out and get an explanation on what's there. We're also going to have a sit down with Sustainable to get them caught up on there are requirements for agricultural exemptions and farms and things that you need to have in place to guarantee yourself that status. Just to review to make sure that they have like their USDA farm plan in place and all those things that keep you in those categories. And then the Wetlands Protection Act behaves a little differently than it does for private homeowner. There's certain activities that are exempt, like growing crops and pasturing animals and the practices that were with it. There's some exemptions for, even building and development if it's a building that's essentially required for the proper maintenance. They usually allow up to, 4,000 square feet of buildable as part of agricultural use, but you have to demonstrate that it's a building that's a necessity for your agricultural activity. You can't just build a house and say, "Oh, it's where I live, on the farm." It's a, I have to have
House for the cows.
I have to have a barn to put my horses in or my cows or those kinds of things. So we need to go over that with them because their operation has gotten to the point where they need to comply to all of those things. That being said, like we do with other site visits, our view on things and our eyeballs don't end at property lines. So if there are other issues that relate to those wetland resource areas where there may be activities going on without permits or unpermitted activities, they may be subject to enforcement as well when we're out there doing our inspection. So don't want anyone to be surprised because usually when someone calls and reports an issue, there's usually more than one. So we'll be out there with them and I'll kind of keep you posted. And that brings us to our last two. The first one is Spears Trust there, 81 Squam Road. So when we went out to do our site inspection for the certificate of compliance at 79 Squam Road and wandering around the property and looking through the hedge and checking out the beach stairs and making sure that everything was in compliance, when we looked next door, here I'll pass this around, but just be sure you'll be able to pass it back because if you guys decide to authorize it, the signature page is on the back. You see the top of the bank on the right-hand picture. We noted that they had done some substantial clearing of brush fairly recently by pretty much clear cutting all of it down to the ground from the bank back to the 25-foot buffer zone. Looking at their original permitted plans, that line of rose bushes that you kind of see in the planter is right at what was the 25 at the time of the permit. And you go through the brush that's there, and it's a lot of grapevines and honeysuckle, and it was clearly something that was more natural prior to when they cut it. But it's fairly recent. You can't see it in the photo, but in the field, all of the little sticks and stumps that are left are still, the wood is still very white and clear. It hasn't grayed over yet. Graying usually takes a few weeks to set in. So my guess is it's happened fairly recently. So I guess I'm looking to get you guys to authorize the issuance of that enforcement. Obviously, it's kind of late to cease and desist, but we'll include that. But then to have them come in with a restoration plan to restore that buffer zone and begin that process with them. That's the first one.
Okay.
So if you guys want to take action on that, that would be
Let's do that right now.
Do we need a motion to?
Authorize enforcement?
yes, to issue the enforcement.
I'll make that motion.
Second that.
Second. All those in favor? Ernie?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Andy? Aye. Ashley?
Aye.
Ian?
Definitely.
All right. Ernie, so if you could sign that one and then pass it back,
There he is.
that would be great.
I want a video.
All right. So then the next one, and for Ashley, Ernie, and Andy, I didn't include a picture with this one because three of you saw it when we went out as part of our regular field viewings to do the viewing at 66 Westchester Street, which we discussed at length this evening. Looking next door, they had clear cut all of their knotweed, which I know we typically encourage people removing invasive species, but it still requires a permit to do. And they also constructed what appears to be a 6-foot high board fence that's clearly within, at least a portion of it was within the buffer zone without a permit as well. So I guess I'm just simply asking to issue the enforcement to start them through the enforcement process as well.
Okay, so we need a motion for 64, Haddock Trust 64 Westchester for issuing enforcement.
So moved.
Second? Okay, all those in favor. Ernie?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Andy? Aye. Ashley?
Aye.
And Ian?
Aye.
Aye.
And before we finish up the enforcement section, it's something that came up today and we've been discussing at length, and something that I'm going to try to write what I would think it would look like as far as a draft. We've been discussing a bit for having an additional fee to a regular filing for what would be an after-the-fact filing, especially one from an enforcement standpoint, where we normally charge, as part of our bylaw fee, we charge $25 to file a notice of intent, and then there's the state fees and the expert review fee and the newspaper fee. A lot of communities do it, and I think it would be a good way for us to do enforcement that's not necessarily ticketing, but if we require a notice of intent for filing to restore something, that instead of the fee for that notice of intent being $25, that there's a more substantial fee because it's an after the fact and for something that was done without permits before, as part of the penalty of doing that. We will do a little research on what an appropriate fee would be, but I would assume that fee would, instead of being $25, you'd probably be looking at a minimum, probably in the hundreds, to do that. And then also possibly an additional, that expert review fee or the third-party review fee, because they take more time than a regular filing, because there's a lot of legwork involved from our end to review it, that fee may be higher as well. And we'll establish kind of the justification for that fee and what it would be, because for us to go investigate the report, issue it out, then have to go and do the work to address reviewing the plan then on a site that's typically disturbed takes much longer than going out to review a wetland line on a site that's in relatively undisturbed condition, because it's a lot more soils work and for vegetated wetlands. And I mean, just like a project like 36 Pocomo, to go out and review those wetlands probably takes 2 to 3 times longer than if the plants are actually there, because you don't have anything to key in on. You're just doing soil transects, and it can just get extremely time consuming. So I think we'd like to try to capture what those actual costs for staff time and your guys' time would be, and then also use it to impose a penalty and still have the ability if we want to ticket, but that way at least there's something to, some penalty to doing it other than filing a regular notice of intent, having to deal with the restoration cost, but something to acknowledge that. But I'll hopefully have that together for the next meeting.
Do we need a vote on that one, or
Nope.
just okay?
I mean, if you guys think that's a good idea, it'd be nice for an endorsement on
I
that.
think so
Absolutely.
too, yeah.
Great
that-
idea.
that
Give
would-
us a
I think-
guideline.
Yeah.
It would be a change in regulation, so we'd have to advertise that, and then you guys would have to take a formal vote, and then we'd have to advertise the fact that the regulations had changed before they went in. So they'd have a set date, but we'll take care of all the logistics for that. It would just be nice to, as you can see from the list, I mean, we have 13 active enforcements, and I know of the one that we have listed here, where there may be 1 or 2, and then I know we have a couple more that are in the works that we could be at 20 pretty shortly. That it just consumes a lot of time to chase these around. So, and it's important. It's important to enforce our rules, or else there's no point in having them. So, that's kind of where we're at, and that's it for me on enforcement.
Okay. Great. Reports. CBC.
Well, I was off island when they last met.
No problem. MPEDC, we had a meeting, but nothing pertaining to us. Mosquitoes?
Nothing right now.
Mosquitoes. Any other committees? You think so? Nope. Okay. Any commissioner comments? Perfect.
Well, I sent an email to Jeff today, but I'll just mention this, that there's a big threats about changing the definition of what are wetlands at the federal level. I don't know how that percolates down to through the state to the local, if that really will affect our operation or not. And we have our own local regs and the state has regs, but
Well, it's the changes that are threatened to be made are essentially changes to what's generally referred to as the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act is kind of the basis for all of the federal wetlands protection. It stems to those, and they're proposing some fairly significant changes to those rules federally. However, 7 states have already kind of banded together through their attorney general's offices to say that if there's any change to weaken the protections of that act, they're prepared to legally challenge those changes. Massachusetts is one of those states, and Massachusetts has also continued to say that they have no plans in weakening their state Clean Water Act. And the state clean water protections are where the State Wetlands Protection Act stems from, and then our local authorities for our wetlands also stems from that. So if we lived in Ohio, or we lived in Kentucky or Missouri, we might see significant changes if some of those go through. Here in Massachusetts, at this point, it doesn't look like we'll be seeing any real significant changes to those acts at this point. It's always tough to say. I mean, I'll be the first to say that there's a lot of talking to NOAA for a couple grants and other things. A lot of the federal environmental agencies right now are operating under a great deal of uncertainty for what's going on, and they're acting very conservatively in what they are doing. They're trying to feel out what's really happening. So we'll keep you posted for what's there. It's very interesting to see.
It's interesting.
But at least we're in one of the 7 states that is actively saying that we have no intention of weakening our environmental protections in our state. So yeah, that's where we are.
Administrative staff report?
Yep, just real quick, and I promise to let you go so we can get out of here shortly. Update on SPPF's meeting. Our third-party reviewer is a gentleman who works out of Woods Hole, and he is completing his review on their report. He did say if you guys have any questions, please email me, and any questions specifically about it, and he'll try to address those in his report if you had just a question for clarity. That being said, as I need to check in with him tomorrow, but right now we have kind of preliminarily scheduled the public component of that presentation for the last 2 Thursdays of March. We have both those dates available depending on how those suss their way out. We just need a room availability, so that's kind of where we are. Look like that.
Yeah, I can't do Thursdays,
So if there's a problem for people, we can try to move it, but we'll sort that out from there. Rooms were filling up, so we just grabbed them when we had the chance. So we definitely want everyone to be there, so we'll sort out a time if Thursdays are problematic, try to find something. But we wanted to make sure that we had instead of this room, the bigger room downstairs, because I think there may be a bit of a draw and have a larger crowd than normal to go through it. So we're just trying to find space. But hopefully we'll get our report back from the reviewer, and we'll go from there. What we're trying to do is when we get word back from him tomorrow, hopefully, and when he's going to have this report back to us, our hopes are publishing the date of the meeting and then requesting to everybody else to have their questions or concerns about the report in a couple weeks before that meeting for you guys to get a chance to review. But that way, if there are questions that can be addressed in writing before the meeting for everyone to review, that the applicant in this case has the opportunity to get those responses ready So we're not trying to do it on the fly at the meeting, and if there's stuff that people want to review from there, we can have that discussion. So that's the hopes for now, is for the last 2 weeks in March there. And if we know Thursday's a problem, we'll look at it. There are other days that work better. No, Wednesdays are tough in that room.
Yeah.
But Mondays, Tuesdays,
Yeah, I can do anything but Thursdays, really.
Fair
Could
enough.
maybe do one of them.
well, I think the intention is to hopefully have the presentation and questions and answers in one. We have the second one, because it's not something we would typically continue.
Just
But if it's a scheduling snafu, or if there's so many outstanding issues that we want to have it in term to revisit it again, that we have the ability to do that.
I can do Thursdays after 6:30.
That sounds awesome. So I'll look into dates in the earlier part of the week too. So
Jeff, can I ask a quick question?
yes,
So if Thursday the 23rd were to be a date and you wanted public comments in 2 weeks before that, that's in 1 week, so.
well that's what.
Speaking for the public.
No. Yes, I think right now we're probably looking more towards the last one.
Okay.
We just haven't been able to get in touch with
Sure.
our third-party reviewer who is doing the analysis on the reports that are there.
Sure.
So,
Okay, I just want to make sure that we sort of talk enough.
yeah, we'll try to get everyone plenty of notice that it's going to go on. And I have a list of everyone who's provided comments leading up to this point, and we'll reach out to all of them individually to say this is when this meeting's going to be. If you have comments or questions, please provide them in advance to be helpful for everybody. I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to review. Because it's a lot. It's a long one. And there's 4 of them. Oh, there's 5 of them if you watch all the videos and all the fun stuff that's there.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
Okay. Nothing else? I will accept a motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Thanks, Ian.